Episode of Christ Over Fear. I'm your host, Chad Jenkins. This next guest I'm about to introduce and have on the show, I am very, very, very humbled to have him on the show, especially this early in Christ Over Fear. He's got a lot going on in his life. A lot of you will know him. A lot of you will be interested in hearing his story. But it's just humbling to me that he took the time to be on this show at such a pivotal time for this show. Because as you know, Christ Over Fear, what we're trying to do with this is have the uncomfortable conversations about Christ and about the spiritual journey, especially for combat veterans and men in particular in that community, and what that looks like. And it can be an uncomfortable conversations. It can be tough conversations. All too often, we've been told that there's supposed to be taboo topics that are off limits. And I want to kind of change the discord on that. I want to flip the script on that and go into these conversations because I think they can be personal. Obviously, they're real. Obviously, they're raw and authentic. And I'm excited to have Mike Burke on. So if you don't know, Mike Burke, he is Command Sergeant Major of 1st SFAB. Prior to that, he was the Command Sergeant Major of 2nd Cavalry Regiment. And then he had a long history in 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. That's where I actually served as a platoon leader with Mike when he was a squad leader and then also a platoon sergeant in 2nd Ranger Battalion. And that's probably the longest length that he served in the military. I think he's racked up between 14 and 15 combat deployments. On top of that, he's got his master's degree in organizational leadership. And then what he's really doing from an entrepreneurial standpoint, he's always had an entrepreneurial spirit about him ever since I've known Mike since 2004. But right now he's the host of Always in Pursuit podcast, which is doing unbelievable things. It's really touching a lot of individuals, both civilians and military. It's bridging that gap and it's pushing people out of their comfort zones, which Mike has been known to do ever since I've known him. I was actually a little bit questioning myself if I say this next line in introducing him, but I'm going to because it's the truth. However, I don't want him to then immediately come on and be like, "Oh, you're blowing smoke." But I will say this about Mike Burke. And I might even probably get emotional saying it. Mike Burke, he is the best leader I have ever been around. The best professional leader. And I don't say that. I will never say that again about another guest that comes on this show. That's how much Mike Burke has meant to me and my development as a leader, watching him. And yeah, on the organizational chart, I was a platoon leader and he was a squad leader and platoon sergeant, but I learned more about what it meant to be a combat leader from Mike Burke, and especially his squad leader days, on what he poured into his squad. Just looking at it now, it was love. I believe it'll be interesting to see what his point of view, but he led from such love. And it wasn't a love that anybody ever put a finger on, but that's how much he cared about his men, developing his men to get them ready to go into harm's way, to make sure that they came home. And it was across the board. It was in training, it was back in garrison, but it was especially overseas as well. So with that, I will go ahead and bring in Mike Burke to the stage. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really well, Chad, and it's an honor to be on here.
Why are you giggling?
It's just funny how things work sometimes, and especially with old Rangers. First, let me just say I appreciate that. I'm not going to question it because that would be wrong. That's how you feel, and I'm honored that I get that privilege and that donation. It's truly humbling, and I appreciate you saying that. But what I was talking about is you specifically focused on my squad leader time, and there's probably a lot of people that would disagree with that, but what I just kind of thought was funny is I was literally just reviewing some stuff this morning, and one of it was a story about a mother actually that at a mutual party before we were getting ready to deploy with one of my squads, and she pulled me off to a side room and she said, "Hey, make sure you bring my son home."
Mm.
And how that was, there's a lot of different points kind of in my career and in my life where um, that are very important to my leadership, but that's probably one of the most important during that time because it's a huge burden and it's a huge responsibility. And there's factors I can't control. There's factors any leader can't control when you talk about combat, but she thought I could. And it just goes into exactly what you're saying, that we had to do everything, and during those times, to eliminate any possibility that somebody wouldn't come home because of our own negligence, or our own inability. And that's why I took things so seriously, during those times. So anyway, I just thought it was crazy that you highlighted that, because I was literally reading about it this morning.
Well, think about what a heavy burden that is, though. I mean, what a heavy burden that truly that is. And as I've come to learn through a bunch of things, but specifically, when I had to go back and revisit, traumatic events that took place in combat, and recognizing, is that full burden really on the shoulders of you, or on the shoulders of me, or any combat leader? Should that burden be placed on that individual? My answer then versus my answer now is actually different. I'd be curious to, and let's go there. Let's talk about that, because I had such a heavy burden of that as well in the roles that I played. But then, while being accountable and being responsible for everything, understanding that I can't control everything. And, and that's been a lifelong journey. It's a journey I fight with now. How did you wrestle that? How did you wrestle that over your leadership time throughout the military, and what you do now?
I think, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's something that evolves over time, but when you're in the midst of it, and we're talking, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed, we're talking 2004 to 2010 timeframe, which was some of the most kinetic deployments. I mean, for everybody across the entire theater, the entire GWAT. I mean, those were just insane times, and the sheer volume of things that were happening every single night, across both countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, and even other countries too. It was insane, and we were caught up in it. We were a part of it. We were part of the cog, part of the wheel, and it was just constantly turning. So my point being is that I don't really think you had a choice. You had to look at it that way. There wasn't time for reflection. There wasn't time to, pick things apart and try to say, well, there's things that are just outside of my control. You're the first line supervisor. You're the first line leader. As a team leader, squad leader, even as a platoon sergeant. Back in those days, you had to try to quantify it in your mind. You had to try to, there are uncontrollables. Well, what can I control? And I can control the here and the now. I can control the mentality, the complacency. Complacency was a big thing. And, and even, some of our deployments, I mean, our guys would sit around and they would go, can we just go out on a target one night and like not get shot at and not get blown up? Like, can there just be one night? And we're like, hey guys, like that would be nice, but we know that's probably not going to happen. So we need everybody, to get it switched on and get in the right mentality, because, it's going to be another night that, we've continued to experience. So my point kind of being is that we didn't have a choice. We had to think of it that way, because we were in the here and the now. We don't now, years later, we can pick that apart and we can go, well, you can't control everything, but within that though, you still have to take the mentality of a leader. What can I control? And I can control the training that happens now, the realistic, how realistic it is, the mind frames that people have going into it and trying to get the most out of it. And the realization that when combat happens, or you're in combat situations and everything is just chaotic, you're not going to rise to the level of your expectations. You're going to fall back to the level of your conditioning and training. And you need to think like that constantly. I mean, as we sit right here, right now, recording this, we don't know what next week is going to look like. And I would make the argument, things going on in Europe, it could be crazy. It could be different than anything you and I experienced in the GWAT. But we don't know. We hope that doesn't happen, but we have to be prepared for that to happen. And you go through history, just the last 200 years of America, United States of America, and just one day we wake up and it's a different world and we're in a different situation, and we just constantly have to be prepared for that. But you're right, it's a huge burden, and it's hard to deal with sometimes.
Yeah, I know. I full-heartedly agree with you. So I'm going to pivot us for a second on this, and I'm going to pivot us to a post that actually was it was a little bit, I had already been thinking about Christ over fear and formulating it in my head. So I posted this about 9 months ago, and it's really kind of the backdrop of why I wanted to start this show. And so I'm just going to read the LinkedIn post, and it's kind of a question at the end, and I'll throw it to you, and that'll kind of start our dialogue on this. But here it was 9 months ago. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think there is an enormous need in the combat veteran community for spiritual dialogue. I think there is an overwhelming amount of combat veterans that are searching for answers involving God and if he exists. And if so, why did he allow the things in combat to happen? And so on and so forth. I think it's time to start having those discussions in the combat veteran community, not to convert them, not to subconsciously influence them, but simply to have hard, difficult, uncomfortable conversations about topics that are way too often off limits, taboo, and too personal. Why do I think this? Because I was one of them, afraid to ask, afraid to speak up, afraid to share my doubts, my insecurities, my lack of understanding. Maybe this is just me, maybe not. What do you think, Mike Burke?
First, before I answer, I just love your transparency. It will be something that I will always love about you, brother. There's not enough people that do it. And especially on social media, people don't throw themselves out there. They throw themselves out there in weird ways. But, when you're talking about leadership, you're talking about spirituality, mentality, and everything else. There's not a lot of people that do that. So I appreciate that. But to answer your question pointedly, I agree. It needs to be have a conversation, because spirituality, sorry, I'm totally messing that up. But
you're good. Spirituality.
Yeah, spirituality. Your journey is very personal. Okay. However, it's also very informative. And what I mean is that you've got to explore it. Okay. One of my, things that I realize is that you can't just blindly go into something. Okay. And, you can make the argument about faith, and that's really what faith is maybe just a little bit of blind kind of, this is what I believe. But it's not quite that simple, because, it doesn't matter what religion we're talking about. You have to be all in your beliefs for it, not necessarily to work, but for it to work inside of you. You've got to believe. So you've got to ask the hard questions, and you've really got to dig into it. Why do I believe this? Why do I want to be part of this? And you've got to really kind of dig into that. You can't just kind of blindly go into it. And a lot of people they do exactly that. They're looking for something, and it's why most people join the military. They're looking for something that is bigger than themselves. Well, religion is the exact same thing. They just, they're looking for something to provide meaning, provide purpose, provide direction, provide left and right limits, some kind of moral or ethical compass as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you bringing up the military, it'd be interesting to see statistically, what the impetus is for folks who join the military, and what the backgrounds are and all that. And I will say the two areas, and that why I think the combat veteran community needs to be one and will be one, and active military, if you will, but probably combat veteran, because it's a little bit easier to as a private citizen discuss these things. But I think I think of two organizations I've been a part of that really were unashamed and unapologetic about talking about faith. And that was football, college football. Like we used to do the Lord's Prayer before every game at Army in our locker room. Now, and I wasn't, I was a heathen at that point in time. So, but I mean, I still knew it. I still knew it, still partook in it. It didn't turn me off. And it was just something, it was part of our culture. And then the military, the same instance, I still think there's a strong dynamic of faith in the military. I just don't know how openly discussed it is. And I think, especially for guys and gals who have experienced the most horrendous things in combat, if we don't go there and tap into those conversations, we're missing what, to your point, I mean, when you're talking about faith, me particularly, when I'm talking about Christ and the Bible and the word, like, and not that I still don't have my questions, not that I still don't have my doubt, not that I still don't have insecurities that pop up, but boy, oh boy, at least I know where I can go for my left and right limit, where I know I can go like, hey, maybe this is a feeling, maybe this is an emotion I don't need to trust. Where can I go to ground myself? Where is my foundation built? And it's built upon that. And it might be also, to your point about why the transition for folks is so hard. It appears so difficult once they leave the military and
Right.
they don't have that being bigger than themselves, or being a part of something bigger than themselves once they leave the military. Because out in the civilian world, you can kind of get thrown to the wayside and be lost in your journey on that. But I guess to ask you, Mike, because I'd love to hear your story. I remember on one of the podcasts we've done, it was Always in Pursuit, and you had I had asked you give an opportunity to ask a question of the host, which I'm not going to do, just so you know, on this show. But I love that part. But I asked you, I said, hey, I heard in an earlier podcast you mentioned the Bible, and you had told me, you're like, yeah, I think, have you read it twice or once?
So I've read the Bible once through. And then, I've probably read it total of twice, but definitely like reading it like a storybook, so to speak, where, just strictly once through. And, we can just dive into it, right here. I mean, when we talk about, religion and how I kind of grew up. So I grew up, Lutheran Brethren, and Pastor Valavic came into my life. He was a pastor of that church. In Sydney, Montana. He came into my life when I needed it. I was going through a lot of things as a teenager, and I've highlighted that stuff in other podcast episodes, specifically on Always in Pursuit. And it gave me exactly that thing that I needed. One, it gave me the direction that I needed. It gave me also, hey, this is what normal is supposed to be like as far as a family goes, as far as, a mentorship relationship, because he was a huge mentor of mine. And actually, even early on in my teenage years, seminary was a conversation that was had, about possibly something that I would do in my future, because it just was providing me what I needed at the time, which was something to write my moral compass, because I was not a good kid. I can make excuses for why that was, but the truth is just I didn't see a lot of right in the world, and I didn't have a lot of people kind of setting the right example for me in the world. Plus, I was just alienating myself from a lot of people as well, especially relatives. So I just didn't have it, and it kind of provided that. But so I read the Bible, when I was a teenager, in a lot of different pieces. I went through conversion.
What's conversion?
So, well, it's called different things, in different religions, but in Lutheran Brethren, it's a 2-year process. And I don't remember the exact grades. I want to say it's 8th and 9th grade, where every Sunday you are, sitting with the pastor for two plus hours, and you're just picking apart different parts of the Bible, and you're going from front to beginning. Or I'm sorry, beginning to end. That didn't make any sense.
I got you.
And the beautiful part about, Pastor Bruce is he was doing a lot of history, at the same time, and talking about, the different history, why this was of historic significance and why it was important. And then at the end, you have to do something in front of the panel, So all the elders of the church, where you have to answer questions, about the Bible, about the studies and everything else. And then for the final thing, I think when I did it, it was probably 3 other kids about my age. We had to basically sit in front of the church, and the pastor, the panel, and the members of the church, and it's a full service. You have to answer questions as well. It was pretty brutal. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, because they're expecting you to not provide opinion, that you're actually just quoting, So, in that process, there was multiple times where, I read the Bible. And then later on a deployment, is the first time I actually sat down and I read it, just from front to end, the entire Bible. And I think that was the invasion of Iraq is where I did that. So, but what I also talked about in the episode is I've also, read the Quran. I've read a lot of stuff about Judaism. I've really read a lot about religion. One, because I find it fascinating, but 2, I think it's just, important to understand, when you talk about perspective, you got to look at different things so you understand all perspectives. And that's part of the cultural immersion that you got to be, privy to when you're working in other countries as well.
Yeah. I'm going to share something with you. And I want to get your take on your perspective. And actually, because you told me, for the audience, I called Mike. Mike and I were talking earlier this week, and I'll share with them. I don't think you'll be offended. I know you, and you're like, hey, I got to be honest, Chad. I'm a little bit, what'd you say, winter season?
I am definitely in the winter season of my spirituality. Yeah.
Which here's the thing about this is like, and to be also completely frank and honest, Mike's like, the only thing you can't tell me is you can't tell me like, oh, you got to accept Jesus. I was like, all right, I won't say that. I was like, well, and I don't even know. I think I said I couldn't guarantee that, but no, I'm not going to do that. Did I say that? Yeah, which I'm not going to do, because it's not it's between you and him, and not me and you. It's between you and him. I think oftentimes when we look at that and the dynamic of why many maybe can be turned off by religion, be turned off especially by Jesus, is not because of the relationship that they do or don't have yet with Christ, but because of the relationship of other people, right, who go ahead and maybe in good faith and good intention, thinking they're doing the right thing. But sometimes we can, in good faith and good intention, still screw it up quite dramatically when we're trying to be, because as soon as we think we have to do that, this is Chad talking. As soon as I think I have to do something on behalf of God, I'm already putting myself ahead of what he can do and his capability. He allows me to join in the fight. He allows me to do a lot of awesome things, but he doesn't need me to do anything. He's got it under control in my viewpoint. But as I was preparing for this, and as I was, and I'm not going to lie, like there's because it is uncomfortable. I think it's uncomfortable, at times discussing it. And what I've come to found, though, is yesterday morning, I was quiet. I was in my Bible, in the scripture in the morning, and the word surrender came in my head, and the word just stuck in my head for a while. And I was like, man, why is like surrender? And then all of a sudden the Ranger Creed popped in my head. And fifth stanza in the Ranger Creed is surrender is not a Ranger word.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And as soon as I thought about that, I was like, man, because I know my walk. I know finally when Christ got a hold of me all the way to my core. I accepted him my senior year at West Point. One of my wide receivers died of an infection. An infection took place, and it was in February of 2002. And Anthony Miller, I loved Anthony, and that kid was a warrior of Christ when I was not. And when he died, and I went to his funeral, and his Baptist preacher got up and just came with brimstone and fire, and like it spoke to me. It was like everything that dude was saying on the pulpit was like hitting home. And I was like, I went up and accepted Christ, and it was very awkward, but it was real. And I never told anybody that. until 2017. I was so ashamed of how I had lived and the embarrassment and everything else up until 2017 is when I finally said, like, no, I know that's when I accepted Christ, was in 2002. But because of the muck and the mar and life, I was ashamed to share that. But over that time frame up until 2017, it was a building of my faith. It just, things took place, combat deployments, being married to Emily, seeing her in the Word quite frequently. And then I'd say when he got 75% of my heart was October 22nd, 2011, when Christo May was killed. And that's when he, it got me to my knees, and I'm like, man, I cannot figure this out. Like there's just things that are, and we were going to church and we were doing all that, but like, I couldn't figure that out because I was still Chad trying to grab onto the reins, Chad trying to figure out how he could figure everything out. And then it was in March of 2017, which, you and I have talked about, there was, I call it the proverbial IED, the proverbial bomb went off in my life, and I completely lost all control. And that's when he got all of me. He got 100% of me. And I say this long-winded story because it was finally at that point that I surrendered. And I surrendered everything. Like, I had no other options. It was like one of those, there's a saying, when Jesus is all you got, Jesus is all you need. And that's all I had at that time. And I clung to him and I clung to him. And he just started building me back the way that he wanted to build me. But yesterday morning and thinking about that surrender, I'm like, man, like, surrender is not a Ranger word. And I was like, it made me think, like, is it a challenge, especially for Ranger Regiment? And because we're into that Ranger creed all the time, and we repeat it constantly. We live by the Ranger creed. However, for me, I had to experience one surrender, at least that one to him. Now, I'm not saying then we surrender on the battlefield, we surrender anything else. But what's your thoughts on that? Like, what do you think when you hear the word surrender? I mean, what's that, Mike Burke? What's that make you think?
Well, I think it ties into, exactly what I was talking about, that, if you're going in your spiritual journey, if you're going to make the decision that, you're going to give all of yourself over to a religion, there has to be a surrender, and not in a cheesy way, like, the song says, Jesus take the wheel or anything like that. Meaning that,
real quick.
What's that?
Can you sing that song real quick?
No, you do not want me to sing that song.
Well, Carrie Underwood, come on.
Is that, yeah, Carrie Underwood, I guess it is. And what I mean is that, you are saying that you are giving yourself, and not necessarily decisions, but the worst part of yourself, the things that you talk about on combat deployments, and, when we dive into that, you talk about combat deployments and the things that you do, the things that you witness, the things that you have to go through, man, those, they plague people forever. And it's hard to ever shake those. But be able to be functional and to be able to continue to move forward in life, people have to find something. And for a lot of people, that is, their spiritual belief and religion, and, that kind of cleansing mechanism that can allow them to continue in life, where they realize that things just happen. It goes back to that word control, things that happen that were just outside of their control. Maybe some were in their control. And, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about that, but you've really got to give over some control in order to be able to move forward from that stuff. And that is an act of surrender. Whether you're, whatever religion you're talking about, it makes reference to that at some point, that you are accepting Jesus into your heart, to absolve you of all the sins that you have committed, and that going forward, you will try to live in his image. You will try to live, you will fail, you will fall short, you will not succeed, but that is always what you are trying to accomplish. You talk about other religions, it's much of the same. Even the Buddhist belief, when you talk about Buddha, And Buddha is that you can't control everything. So why are you trying to? Why are you trying to sit there and get mad about a specific thing? You can't control the actions that went into that, but you can control your mind frame that goes into that. So there's a lot of surrender that accompanies all that. And the thing that a lot of people just don't really kind of apply thought to is what does that mean? And what are you trying to accomplish with that? Is it just an action because you're trying to be better for the sake of being better, or you're trying to live in the image and what is expected of you depending on what religion you're talking about? And there's a difference between but it goes back into that surrender piece that you're talking about. And a lot of people just don't really that's even harder for veterans as a whole to really kind of understand. Myself, I've had to just kind of realize that there's a lot of things that I just can't control. There's a lot of mistakes that I've made in this life, and I've spent years of my life making myself sick, thinking about the mistakes that I made and how I wish I could go back in time and I could fix every single one of those and I could do things differently, in personal life, but then also professional life, but then also on deployments as well. And you just have to realize that you can't go back and you can't control that stuff. But you do have to talk about it and you do have to work through it. And it's not that you never come to terms with it. You just understand that I can't change it. And going forward, I promise to do differently, whether that's in religion or outside of religion. I'm going to do better every single day. I know I'm going to probably mess up. I'm going to try to prevent that. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to do what I know needs to be done. But tomorrow I'm going to try to do better. Or I'm at least not going to try to repeat that mistake or that action.
Yeah, and I think all your points so valid on that topic, on this topic, and especially on surrender. And I think that's where, like for me though, like if I rely upon myself, I already know what I was capable of or what transpired, and I know if I don't have that, and if I don't have him to go to, well, then I'm just I get back to the self-reliance, right? And relying upon myself, uh, it runs short. It will run short. I will run out of, and that's what happened in 2017. I had no other options. All of the Chad options had been exhausted, and there was no other ones that I was going to formulate or come up with that was going to get me out of that big of a hole. So that's why, boom, I had to go to him. I'm curious on your point, and we didn't really dive into it. And I know it's uncomfortable, but I know you too, and you're able to talk about it. Is winter season right now? Why do you think that is? Can you go deeper into where you're at currently for you in that winter season, and why the smirk?
Because I've spent a lot of time since we've talked on the phone, thinking
Okay.
about how I would answer this question. You can't just say things arbitrarily and not expect the chicken to come home to roost. You got to be able to answer up to them, and you got to be able to specify.
See, that's why we shouldn't have talked prior to.
Maybe,
See, 'cause then I've given you some preparatory time
well,
frame. I'm
yeah,
joking.
no,
I'm
no,
not
no.
trying to ambush you.
No. It's important to talk about. It's important to talk about because it's not like, I'm out here just willy-nilly, not necessarily being tied to anything. Uh, it's a single point for me. And you talked about your story about, 2002, 2017, and then, some of the other situations that happened in your life that were part of your spiritual journey. Okay.
Mhm.
That actually just there was points, there was probably dips, there was ebbs and flows, just like anything in life. Um, Mine was the exact opposite. I came in with a very sound religious belief, and a belief that, um, you know, my heart belonged to Jesus, and I was always going to be trying to live in his image. And as time went on in my life and things happened in my life, I that just became more and more difficult for me to believe. It just has. And it's not that, I don't completely just I'm void of belief. It's not that. It's just that I struggle to say that there's some all-knowing, all-merciful, all-powerful being that exists that really actually governs all life, and governs everything that happens. And a lot of that is just because of the circumstances that I've seen and the circumstances that I've been a part of. But then also it just comes down to times where I've I've talked about this, and I'm writing a little bit about it now where I've pleaded for help. I've pleaded for different things, and there's just been a void of any kind of any answer. And it's not that I expected a burning bush,
Yeah.
to all of a
Would have
sudden
been
start
nice, right? Would
yeah,
have been
well,
nice though.
maybe some kind of sign,
Yeah.
um, and it, I hate to, do a movie quote, but Liam Neeson from The Gray, where he's pleading with God trying to save that guy's life, and he says, "Well, f this, I'll just do it myself." And it's not that I'm necessarily there. It's just that I'm not. The scripture talks about if you are lukewarm, I will spit you from my mouth.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say
Dude, you're going
something.
to Revelation. Look at
Yeah,
you.
yeah, right. I am not going to say something that I'm not 100% behind. I'm
Yeah.
not going to just completely commit myself when I know in my hearts of hearts I'm struggling. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that's not going to change in my lifetime because
Yeah.
I believe it will.
Yeah.
I'm just still in my journey of the seasons. I've went through the spring,
Yeah.
the awakening, so to speak, the summer where it was a huge part of my life. And then unfortunately, I went through the fall as well. And
Mhm.
right now I'm in the winter. And but it does not mean that I still don't do a lot of things that religious people do, because I
Yeah.
do. I absolutely, when people want to talk about it, I want to have a conversation about it. I want to understand why they believe what they believe. I'm not going to question them. I'm not going
Yeah.
to criticize them one bit. That is for them to decide. At the end of the day, whatever you believe, you're going to have to answer it after you're buried 6 feet. You're going
Yeah.
to have to answer it for whatever religion, whatever it is you believe. And it's going to be you standing in front of whatever, and you're going to
Right.
have to answer for it. So counting on others to help you through that or to answer your questions is not always going to be the most helpful thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Okay, counselors and people that can answer questions for you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you don't rely on them, but you're the one that's going to have to atone for everything. And right now, I want to help people that are struggling in their beliefs, or maybe they have questions. If I can answer them, or I can link them up with somebody that's going to answer them, I'm going to absolutely build them up in that. I mean, I can talk about right now, my wife is going through one of the biggest spiritual journeys of her entire life, and I am nothing but supportive of that. I am helping her in every possible way that I can. I'm doing even my own research to provide her information and answer some of the questions that she has about it. Because I want to be part of that journey for her. Maybe that'll translate into something that'll happen for me, and something will be reawakened in me. But I'm not. Part of it is that I watched growing up, and I've seen it a lot through my life. Is a lot of people that are Christians or Muslims, um, that proclaim it, judge other people for it, judge other people for not believing what they believe. But then I watch what, whoops, sorry,
You're good. It means you're
watch what they're
passionate,
doing.
dude. I
Yeah,
love it.
well, a little bit. I am. But then I watch them, what they're doing and how they're living their lives. And I'm like, wait, what are you doing? What right do you have, one, to judge anybody? I don't care what religion you believe in. It talks about judgment and who has the right to judge people. But then also at the same time, you can't sit there. You can't sit there and do that. You can't say one thing on Sundays but then live your life Monday through Saturday a completely different way. It doesn't work like that. You have to try to be constantly getting better. You have to constantly be trying to get more tied in to, a better version of yourself within that religion. And so I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to say that I'm something when I know that my heart is not all the way in it. I'm not going to live like that. That's a
Mm-hmm.
hypocrite, you
Yeah.
know. I do believe I have a moral compass. I do believe that there's parts of it that are actually tied to religion. I do believe that part of my responsibility on this earth is to add value to other people, make other people better, and help them in whatever journey, whether it's mindfulness, spirituality, whatever they're doing. I'm gonna help them with that. But that doesn't mean that it has to be necessarily tied to something. And I'm gonna proclaim something that I just 100% don't believe with all my heart.
Man, I love you. I do, because you went, no, Mike, this is what I wanted. This is the dialogue that I think so many will be able to relate to and
Yeah,
be right there, and maybe not even have been able to articulate it or have not even sat on it yet to recognize it. And it ties into even what I said at the beginning as far as, it's usually I won't say always because that's a little bit too,
yeah,
psychologically, I'm not supposed to say that word, but typically it's another individual that turns somebody else off
it is
from
true.
their walk, to
It
the
absolutely is.
hypocrite, right? Every single individual's a hypocrite. That's life. But then,
That's true.
those with the loudest microphone or megaphone oftentimes can be the biggest prohibitors of how to truly walk. And I
Hey,
also think, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to add something on that. When
Yeah.
you talk about people and how people are dissuaded, you got to find that person that doesn't just speak to you in the context of the religion, but that also speaks to you as an individual.
Hmm.
Um, and ask the hard questions. If you don't know, then get out there and have the hard questions. And man, I'll tell you, Chad, over the last, 5, 7 years when I've been struggling, through this, I have sat down with many, many people, chaplains and a lot of other, a rabbi. I mean, I'm just going to be honest, or even a
Yeah.
rabbi. And I've asked these hard questions and I've tried to, talk through it. Some have really kind of resonated with me and then some just haven't. And that's okay. That doesn't mean anything. That just means that I didn't connect with them as a person. That doesn't mean I didn't connect with them, with the religion or whatever we're talking about. It's just that person's not for me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you can't just kind of pass judgment because of one thing. You've got to, if this is something that you really want to pursue, or this is something that you think you just don't have the answers to, then get out there and do the hard work. Just like you talk about in your behavioral health journey. And I've quoted you, Chad. I'm telling you right now, since we sat down and we recorded the episode and Always Pursuit, probably 100 times about doing the hard work.
Hmm.
Don't talk to me about, how you can't get better or how you're not getting help. If you're not willing to put in the work, it's not going to matter. It's not, there's no jump start or detour that you can just bypass. You got to go through it, and it's going to get worse before it's ever going to get better. Well, spirituality and religion can be the same way.
Yes, 100%. Well, and I also think, and I'd be curious, and I'll follow up on that with regards to, you said, hey, Chad, mine's actually reverse of what yours was. I came in kind of with a stronger faith, and it's digressed over time, and the instances and the events that took place to kind of have that happen. I'd be curious. Well, I guess, is that what you've done? You've explored those events, if you will, with like a rabbi or with a chaplain or with a pastor on those events. Have you gone, because this Christ over fear, mental health is not off the table. I want to talk about mental health on here. We
Right.
have to
Yeah.
talk about mental health. My viewpoint is, mental health is tied into spiritual, emotional, mental, physiological, physical. It's all encompassing. That's how, I try to have every facet of my life be congruent, if you will. So Chad emotionally, Chad mentally, Chad spiritually, Chad physically, Chad, what actions he's partaking in, to your point, I hope are the same and they're grounded in the same thing so that I can, one, be authentic in every area, be authentically who I am in, in the house, coaching my son in sports, at work, in a meeting, and so those are all congruent. But I guess, did you dive into that mentally, like mental, therapy or anything else on those events as well?
Yeah.
What'd
So,
that look like?
yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, hey, take it
No, no, no,
wherever, you don't have
no, no,
to.
no, no. It was ugly. And I will give 100% credit to the chaplain that helped me. I was a Charlie Company first sergeant, and that is where there was points throughout my life where I had major kind of mental blocks, major mental. My mentality just completely degraded. And I've talked about, when I was 12 and I was 16 and, struggles with depression and suicide. But I was a Ranger First Sergeant, and the loss of somebody that I just idolized. And yeah, I understand I'm on a religious podcast and I say idolized, but
Well,
yeah,
dude,
yeah, it's not that he was a
I'm
false
not.
prophet. It's not that I was worshiping him. It was just
He
when you
was a
talk.
role model that wouldn't inspired you.
Yeah, exactly. And he is the big part of who I became, as a military leader and as a man, as a husband and father and everything else. Um, but when he died, that was just the final straw that broke the camel's back. And I lay in a bunk and I couldn't function. I couldn't think. I tried to call people, to inform them about Josh dying, and I couldn't talk. And it was finally at that point, where the dark thoughts started creeping in the back of my mind. I was like, I can't do this alone. I just can't. I can't keep on like this. I've been bottling things up for 35 years, and deployments, childhood trauma, and everything else. I can't do this alone. And it was a chaplain because of where we were and, resources available and everything else. And when I sat down and, you talked about this and I've talked about this, that when finally, we sit down and we're in the room and I start just, okay, hey, what do you want to talk about first, Sergeant? Man, I jumped timelines. I'm pretty sure it was like first person, second person, third person. Like, we were talking about like 6-year-old Mike, 35-year-old Mike, deployment in between here. I mean, it was everywhere and anywhere, all just jumbled into one, with key points of trauma and other difficulties that I went through, and talking about religion and, asking the question, where was God when I needed him here? Why would
Mhm.
God let this happen? Why, all these different kind of things. And it wasn't easy for him. In fact, his quote was, I think we need to call somebody else in because this is a lot. And I'm like, great. Okay, cool. So
Way to
you're calling
reassure
in,
me.
yeah, you're calling in backup where I'm one person. Okay, awesome.
Uh,
But honestly, now looking back, it was, man, I bombarded him. And, I gave him, 45 minutes of a life story where I probably skipped a lot of different things, and there wasn't a lot of narrative in there. It was just very kind of bam scenes, and it was a lot to unpack. And it's still ongoing. Just this week, Sarah and I sat down and we were afforded an opportunity to go through something that was called a leadership health assessment. And, provided by the organization. And we sat down, we talked spiritual fitness, we talked social fitness, family fitness, all these different kind of things. And, I'm still unpacking things.
mhm.
I still write about these things a lot, and I've shared something with you that I'm currently working on, and you're talking, man, 117 pages, single spaced, a size 8 font, and there's things that I've typed in there within, the last 24 hours, that I'm still just kind of trying to think through and try to kind of figure out, what happened there? What was my mentality? Why did that impact me so much? How do I work through that? What do I need to do? What work do I still need to do? Because there's a lot there. And I don't want to sit here. The one thing, and I just want to make this a clarifying point. Do not compare your life to mine or to Chad's. Okay. And what I mean is, I had childhood trauma. There was, I would never wish upon my worst enemy, and I'll just let people use their imagination. 14 combat deployments. There was a lot of different things that happened there, a lot of suicide, a lot of different things that I've went through in my life. And maybe you're sitting there and you're however old and you haven't deployed, and maybe you didn't suffer any childhood trauma. It doesn't matter. Trauma's trauma. Everybody deals with it differently, and that's okay. Don't think, well, I can't be feeling this way, or I can't be struggling because I've never been through what Mike Burke's been through or Chad Jenkins. Don't do that, because by doing that, you're reducing the trauma you went through, and then you're also doing the same to mine.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. Trauma is trauma, and everybody deals with it differently, and you still have to unpack it. And the other very, very key point of that is don't wait. Don't delay. Deal with it when you're ready to deal with it, and sit down with people and have them help you do that, because it's extremely, extremely important. I had 35 years of monkeys in the trunk. And when they finally got out of that damn trunk, they beat the living shit out of me. And different situation, different circumstances, I might not be sitting here. I might have acted on something and ended my life if I just made maybe one decision, or I've been in a different location. So the point is don't compare trauma, and deal with it in stride.
You're absolutely right. And I think, unfortunately, and I'm going to say unfortunately, because I think now, the way it happened with you when you were at Seco, and then me in 2017, like I didn't choose for my life to blow up then. I actually will say I didn't have the courage, and I didn't have the strength, and I didn't have the mental capacity to hey, tap out and go to the VA and go to the PTSD clinic. It had to get, and I give credit to the Lord in this. He had to blow it up so big that it was undeniable. And I couldn't run from it. I couldn't avoid it. I couldn't minimize it anymore. And I think, while the way in which it got there, similar to you, all of a sudden it hit, and all of a sudden you were there, and you couldn't deal with it anymore, because it was so big, and the emotions that that happened and took over, that you had to go see someone. Thank God for mine. Thank God for yours. But why I preface this is unfortunate is because I went to the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center and the PTSD clinic, and they had a chaplain and a psychologist that they had just started this group, because I really wanted to be a part of a Christian-based group, and they had just started. It was called the Healing Combat Trauma Group, and it was led by those two, and you had to be a combat veteran to be in that group, and they kind of vetted you. And I got to that group, and Mike, I was one of 2 OEF guys there. Out of 15. The other 13 were Vietnam guys.
Yeah.
And I share that because your point of go now, go tomorrow, go start the process, because and those guys had, and I will speak on this group as well, because it was the first time I actually ever saw what Christ meant by the church. And the church is not brick and mortar. The church is not some building that you go to with a pastor up on the pulpit and speaking to the congregation. The church was these 15 men circled in chairs with a chaplain and a psychologist, and pouring their hearts out, the good, the bad, the ugly. And those guys were warriors of Christ, but they were also as real as it got. That's the first time I ever saw. I was like, okay, this is what he's talking about. These men were such warriors, but to a man, they will have said the exact same thing you said. Yet they had 35 to 45 more years of it. And behind those 35 to 45 years was destruction, was broken relationships, was severed relationships with all types of. So it doesn't get better. The kicking the can down the curb, the thinking that, oh well, I'll just put it off until next year or in 6 months. I've got a lot of work going on right now, and no, that doesn't work. The destructive path behind us is only going to get worse if we don't go and seek it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely will. And I mean, the times have changed, in and out of the military. It's more conducive to going and seeking behavioral health, and going and getting help, and dealing with all this different stuff. I say it's gotten better, but it's not as far as it needs to go. There's still stigmas that surround it. Recently, I'm dealing with a leader. That one of his first questions, when he was going through some of the behavioral health challenges that he had is, how is this going to affect, promotions going forward or assignments going forward? And we're not worrying about that right now, man. Okay. We're worrying about the next 20, 30 years. What's your life going to look like? Let's deal with the here and the now and the struggles that you have. We'll sort through that and we'll figure everything else on the backside. But, the fact that you're seeking help before it reached, some cataclysmic event, speaks that, you want to get better and that you need to actually be the leader in front of formations, because I think that's a big thing too. If you've never actually dealt with this stuff and you've never actually struggled, then, when you stand up in front of formations or you stand up in front of organizations as a leader, you're talking from a theoretical perspective instead of a personal perspective. And when you talk from a personal perspective, you're more genuine, and you're going to actually offer something to people that comes from your own experiences, and they're going to recognize that and they're going to see that, in the things going forward and how you handle things going forward.
Yeah. One other thing I want to talk about, Mike, when you talked about, the events that took place and, the time frames where you said, hey, where are you, Lord? Where are you, God? Like, I need you. Like, you're not sending a burning bush, but like, where are you? I want to talk about that from my standpoint, because, there have obviously been those events and I've had those conversations, personal conversations with him as well. And I remember before 2017 and really going into finally being completely honest with myself on who I was and just to the core of me, if you will. And prior to that, when I'd be like James 1, it says like, consider it pure joys, brothers and sisters, when you find yourselves in affliction, because affliction produces, perseverance produces, endurance, so on and so forth. And I remember reading that. I always be like, I don't want that. Like, who would want, who considers it pure joy when you find yourself in affliction? And then when I was in the deepest affliction of my life, I finally got it. Because it was also at that moment where I felt the closest I had ever felt to him. And even now, like after now, what's that? 22, 17. So 5 years later, okay, there's peaks and valleys, but kind of on an upward trajectory to what I was at that point. But there are still times now that I'm like, man, like I want to get back to that reliance of what I was in March of 2017, because that affliction was also the moment that I felt most near to him. And while I have since 2017 wanted to be like, okay, like, man, I feel like I'm doing all the things that you're asking me to do. I'm being obedient. My left and right limits are set. Even when I find myself off a little kilter, I come to you, I confess, I repent, and I turn my eyes back to you. Like, why are you not showing me this? But when I get caught up in that, I recognize, because I know me and I know the old me, if he were to give me that, if he were to give me what I'm looking for, well, then I don't need him tomorrow. I don't need him in a week. I don't need him in a year. And so I've kind of come to accept that, like, hey, this life, this life is not supposed to be roses, and it's not supposed to be little butterflies all over. He doesn't guarantee us that. He doesn't, I will never leave you nor forsake you, but he doesn't tell me that I'm going to have all peaches and roses and ice cream. Like, and so I guess on my rant that I'm just now having, my rant though is like, and I don't do it all the time. I do not do it all the time, but when I do, and I recognize like, yeah, the reason maybe this isn't being answered, the reason this maybe isn't ready for me to know yet is because he's God, I'm not, and I'm not, he knows that I'm not prepared yet because I won't rely upon him. I'll start to go back and rely upon myself. So I just, that stuck in my head when you said that, because I've been there too. I think there's a lot who are out there like, hey, you know, I'm doing all these things. Why are you not showing up? And at least for me, if my story and where I've come to kind of get peace in that could help somebody else, then that's the point of this, right? It's not to say you need to do this, you need to be doing that. It's what has happened in my life. Where am I at now? And that's what I love about you too, Mike Burke, is you can take us back to childhood. You can take us back to 2012. You can take us to, but you go to the here and now as well. And I think that's the courage of a leader. That's the courage of somebody who knows who they are fundamentally to the core of them, because I see it all the time. People are great at telling others where they were 5 years ago and how they overcame that obstacle and where they are to now. People generally suck at telling where they are and sucking in the here and now, right? And I'm not saying you go blast it to the world. I'm not saying it's for the world to know, but I am saying that we need to, as men, collectively understand that when we are in a challenge, and you said it, you said, I had run out of options, or, I was all by myself, and I said the same thing. I had run out of option. There was nowhere else to go. I hope that what we talk about today can encourage that guy or gal who's out there to know that they're not alone and to seek help now in the here and now, rather than trying to get it through themselves alone and then being able to speak about it 5 years down the road.
Oh, I appreciate you saying that, and you're spot on that people will try to build a basis of transparency off of things that have happened in the past. And while they're important and they're also the building block of who somebody becomes, they're not always the most relatable. Don't tell me where you are, where you were, tell me where you are now. And, somebody could be listening to this as well and say, well, they could be judging me. Well, it plays right into your point of exactly what you were saying. Maybe this is the journey I'm supposed to be taking. Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be exactly, if there's a God, where this God is, whatever dimension it exists in, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe this is part of my path, and I just don't know the end result, but it goes into that surrender piece. And, it'll display itself later. But then also, going directly into your point too, is that more leaders need to be having conversations like this. Like, there's so many people that are out there that I have this ticket for success. You do this, you do these 5 steps and you'll be a multimillionaire. Bullshit.
Yeah, I know.
You're wrong. That might have worked for you, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work for me. Your spiritual journey might have worked for you, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for me. Now, you can tell me your story. You can tell me where you faltered. You can tell me the current struggles you're going through, and then I can relate with you as a person. Right. And then you and I can have a dialogue, and we can talk in the here and the now. Be present in this moment, and we could talk through these things, and maybe it will trigger something that already exists within me. Something I'm talking about a lot now is everything you need to be successful is already in you. You're lacking a trigger of some kind. You're just, and somebody might spur that in you, but more than likely it's going to be a circumstance that's going to happen in your life that's going to make you action it and go and do something. It's going to be that kind of bombshell that goes off, and it's going to result in a major revolutionary change in your life. Well, spirituality can be the exact same way. Everything you need, everything already existing within you. You just haven't unlocked it yet. And that's why you need to have the conversations that are in the present and are also highlighting the uncomfortable truths. You know, doesn't matter what religion you talk about, it doesn't say that you can't just kind of have questions and struggle. That's part of life.
Yeah.
You know, that is part of it, man. We are so messed up. We know nothing. We know nothing about what this world encompasses and what is really, really, really true out there. We love to believe, we like to think that's good. But the best way to understand is to talk to other people and try to figure it out so that it makes sense in our own mind, so that it enhances our journey, it adds value to others, and it just makes us all better. If we, instead of sitting here saying I have all the answers, instead we say, hey, I might have a piece of your puzzle that you've been looking for. Let's have a conversation about it and let's share with each other. Let's build upon each other and let's help each other out. I'm not going to judge you for the place you're in, whether you're poor, you're rich, you're weak, whatever it is. I'm not going to judge you for it. I'm just going to help you by adding value to you, telling you what I know. You tell me what you know. You share about your experiences. You share about your perspectives. And let's cumulatively just get better and make our piece of the world better. We're not going to fix the world today, but we can fix our piece of it. I can walk out of this after we're done and I can tell my wife I love her. I can tell her I appreciate her, and that she did something today that just absolutely just made me humble and will make me appreciate her for the rest of the day. Okay, I didn't solve any major crisis. I didn't make the world a better place. But you know what? That meant the world in
For
my
her, you
life.
did.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
maybe she'll do that in turn, or somebody else
Right.
will during that. Or I could just shoot a text after this and I can say, Chad, I love you, man. You're an awesome dude. I appreciate you and thank you for what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those kind of things. And it's not all love and gumdrops and rainbows. It's not all that crap, but it's just, hey, building on each other, and trying to make each other better and not passing judgment and just trying to add value to people's lives.
Yeah. Well, you keep on mentioning judgment, because it's a common. No, I like it, and
It
here's
is.
I posted something not too long ago. I said I'm great. I'm great at extending God's judgment, and I'm wonderful at accepting His grace. And it needs to be opposite, because to your point, it's not our job to judge. He
Yeah.
never. Hey, when he comes back on the white horse, it's him judging, not me. I'm not. At no point I'm to love. I'm to love others as myself. That's what he tells me to do. But I'm to extend, and that is extending grace and extending mercy to others. But so often it's easy to get caught up in the judging of others, right? And
Yeah,
that's not what he calls us to do. Hey, vengeance is mine, not God says it. Vengeance is mine, not yours. Because it's so maybe that goes back to control and surrender. Like it feels controlling. It feels good in the here and now to try to cast judgment at other, make myself feel better and all that. But at the end of the day, at the core, that's temporary. To your point, the 30-day fix on how to get your life back and all that, that's temporary. Or, because you might feel good. I might feel good for, a year, 2 years, 3 years, but that's still temporary when we're talking about eternity and how to do that. So, Mike, I just appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you having this true, transparent, authentic, real conversation and conversation in the here and now, not just what your walk was in the past, but bringing us up to full speed. And, so I thank you for that, because you are, and that goes back to my first point. I mean, you're the best leader I've ever been around, and you continue to be so. And the reason for that is because the courage, you're unafraid to go out front and do things that others just aren't ready and prepared to do, but by God, they'll follow it. And that's the reason for it. So I'm going to close us out. I'm going to throw you off on the side here, but do you want to say any parting things before I close us out on this episode?
I just want to say thank you again, Chad, and just keep up the good fight. And, if anybody wants to further the conversation with me specifically, they can find me at alwaysinpursuit.org or Mike S. Burke on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook, or even on Twitter. But share this channel, share this episode with somebody that you think it can help. Maybe you're struggling to have a uncomfortable conversation with somebody, and this can be the catalyst to start that dialogue. So share it with, let's make a challenge here. Share it with at least 2 people. Everybody listen to this, share this with 2 people. I know I'm going to. Thank you again.
Hey, thanks, brother. All right. Love you, man.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. That was Mike Burke with Always in Pursuit podcast. This channel, it's Christ over fear. Obviously, I've dedicated my life to Jesus. And as we just saw, Mike is not there yet. He's still in the navigation of spirituality, which there's a lot out there that are. That was me as well in my journey, and that's okay. But we need to have those conversations and go to people that we can have those authentic conversations, not to judge them, not to tell them what they need to do, but just to be there for them. And that's why I wanted to have Mike on. I wanted to have him on early because I think there's a lot of combat veterans out there that have been in the fray and they're asking questions and they don't know how to get the answers. And I want to encourage us to find that tribe that we can go to have these conversations, have these difficult moments to deepen our relationship with him, but also to deepen our relationship with each other so that we can grow. So until next time, continue to fight the good fight, and we'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.